Good evening, sports movie fans, and welcome to our first Olympic film screening. Coming to you live from the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm Jim Crowley, and across the booth from me is my buddy Parker Glazer. Parker, how you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing excellent, Jimbo. How is your day treating you?
My day was treating me just fine and made even better by watching the 2004 Walt Disney picture, Miracle, the dramatization of the 1980 Olympic hockey match between the Soviet Union and the United States, the so-called Miracle on Ice, one of the greatest sporting events in American history, possibly the best in sporting history. And this movie is a really fantastic film to boot as well. And just to give a little background as to what this story meant to a lot of people and why this story still rings true, I'll turn it over to you.
So looking back, and the movie does a fantastic job in the opening credits of really laying out where was America in the 1970s. If you want the short and sweet answer, it was a shit show. America was going through probably one of its low points, really coming off of the highs of World War II and the 1950s. It was really struggling through the 60s and 70s. Just to list off a few of events that were going on. There was the Vietnam War, which at this point was coming to an end. Richard Nixon and the issues of Watergate, swell time. There was Jimmy Carter dealing with all of the issues of his presidency, from inflation to the energy crisis to a lot of crises he dealt with. General widespread protests across America on a multitude of issues, including civil rights issues. Technology was changing the country once again, with a funny little line I found in the beginning of silicon chips. They may just change the world one day. Yeah, and now that's why we have a freaking, I can't get a new car for like 20 more years. And then nuclear energy was a hot button topic, along with nuclear weapons in general. So when you look at what was going on, America was not in good spirits. The country was at one of its low points, and it was really starved for moments to really resurrect the spirit of energy of the country. And going into the 1980 Winter Olympics, there wasn't a lot going for them, because generally the Soviet Union is very competitive across all sports in general, both summer and winter. But the winter was kind of where they made their bread and butter, because in Soviet Russia, there's not a lot to do in the wintertime except skate and, drink vodka. But generally, the USSR really dominated winter sports, especially men's hockey. For the last 8 years, from 1980 going back to I believe the last 8 Winter Olympics, they won 6 times for men's hockey. They were a dominant team. The last time that the U.S. men's national team had won in hockey was in 1960 at the Squaw Valley Olympics in Lake Tahoe, California. There's a funny little tidbit that is called the Forgotten Miracle on Ice, because again, Russia was still a very dominant force. But this was undoubtedly a David and Goliath match, and America was starved for a moment to really resurrect their national spirit.
Indeed. And when the team arrived in Lake Placid, there weren't many high hopes for the U.S. hockey team led by Coach Herb Brooks. In fact, the main goal of the U.S. Olympic Committee was simply not to be embarrassed at home, which was a very tall order, considering that, as you said, Parker, the Soviets had dominated U.S. hockey for years and years. But in this case, Herb Brooks had a special plan in mind for his team of players, which was to basically throw the Russians' game back at them. He trained them very much in the way that the Russians would play, conditioned the heck out of them, which led to a really interesting scene that we'll get to later. But the U.S. really came in as the underdogs, and when they started to win, when they started to get closer to the medal round game against the Soviet Union, people started to sit up and take notice. And sure enough, on the night of the game, a miracle occurred. The U.S. beat the Soviets, and Al Michaels, in his now iconic phrase, asked the country, "Do you believe in miracles?" Yes. And a lot of people actually forget that was not the gold medal game. The gold medal game came after, against Finland, and the U.S. almost lost that game. So
actually, I think, wasn't it Sweden? I think it was Sweden, not Finland.
I think the Finns might have been in the final. I think they played Sweden. They tied Sweden, I think, in the first game. I think they tied 2-2, which kept them in contention.
You might be right on that one. I'll have to double check that later. But you are absolutely correct that many people imagine just because of the lore and hype around this event that it was the final match, but it was the first round of the medal round. Although this was what then led the U.S. to go to the next game where they would win gold. And to give a little perspective around why this was so pent up, because nowadays when we talk about either the Summer or the Winter Olympics, generally it's like, oh, it's the best athletes from around the countries going to compete against one another.
Right.
Back before, I believe it was like the mid 1980s, because before like the mid 1980s, it wasn't professional athletes that were allowed to compete in the Olympics. It was amateur athletes. It was a way of showing kind of like the everyday sort of person going and competing on behalf of their country. It wasn't like professional athletes going and competing against the best of the best. It was a badge of honor to go and compete on behalf of your country. But what's interesting though, with how they determined that amateur level status was essentially whether you played for a professional team or not. And so because of that, many American players generally were not, when they went to compete for the Olympics, weren't usually the best players. In fact, actually, and this is an event that happens within the movie, there was a matchup between the all-star team for the NHL versus the Soviet team.
Yes, it was.
Earlier before this game happened. And the all-pro team for America was decimated. They were completely destroyed. It was almost just a giant wagging, like that big old Natumbo finger going to from the USSR and the US saying, oh, no, you aren't that good.
It was an embarrassment for sure.
Yeah. And what really was big about that was that the American players were genuinely amateurs. Anybody who basically played for the American teams, at least for hockey, they were not NHL players. They were lucky to go to the AHL, which is the second level below that. Usually they wouldn't be drafted at all, though. And so they were really players coming out of college or who were bumming around just trying to make a living playing hockey for fun. But in the USSR, though, this was a very different situation because in the USSR, professional teams were not as big of a thing because of the dynamics of, socialism or communism, whatever you want to describe what USSR was at that time. And so many of these players were just national team players who never officially played for a professional team. And so because of that, for decades, literally decades, they could play all together through and through for their national team in the Olympics without ever declaring themselves a professional athlete, which is interesting because when you look at the makeups of these two teams in the 1980s Winter Olympics, the average age for the USSR was around 28. The average age for the US, 21. So on paper, each player had about 7 years more experience, which is a lot of experience for a professional athlete or any athlete in general. And so, again, that is what made this such a David and Goliath setup. It was not only the US versus USSR. It wasn't even just the fact that the USSR had beaten the very best professional players that America had. It was that this team that Herb Brooks had put together really were underdogs and people that nobody gave them a chance in hell of winning this match, let alone even winning the gold medal.
Exactly. And another detail too, you're right that they were state sponsored, but I think most of the Soviet team were also members of the Red Army in name only. I think Vladislav Tretiak, who was the greatest goalie in the world at that time for the Soviet Union, said that he had climbed through the ranks without doing any army work whatsoever. So you might say in Soviet Russia, loophole exploit you. So.
You're absolutely right, Jimbo. And along with that also, and not to go on and on about this, but Russia doesn't exactly have the cleanest record, even including recently, of substance abuse and performance enhancing drugs. So it wouldn't surprise me if there wasn't even a little bit of that going on. Again, not that we have any evidence to support that necessarily, but given track records, it wouldn't surprise me.
Indeed. And when we come back to America, one of the things that Herb Brooks really forced his team to do was he wanted the best conditioned team in the Olympics. He said they may not be the best, but they will certainly be the best conditioned. And there's a very famous instance in both the team's story that was perfectly translated onto the film. Was after a exhibition game against Sweden in the weeks leading up to the Olympics, they played a very flat game, shall we say. They tied Sweden 3-3, and in terms of the standings, Sweden was the worst, kind of the weakest team that they would face. And right after the game, Brooks forced them to stay out on the ice and run from blue line back, red line back, blue line back, end line back, which if you're an athlete, you know that's anytime you have to run the length of the field and back, that's exhausting. And
Let
he
alone
kept
skate those lines too. Because you
exactly,
imagine
exactly.
you people, your average person who goes out like during the winter and goes ice skating, like, my God, this is impossible. And these men are doing this like it's nobody's business. They do it hundreds of times over. You have to give respect to hockey athletes. For all the padding and everything, they are some of the best conditioned athletes out there because they not only play with grace while on skates, they play with power and intensity as well.
Exactly. And one of the things that Herb was basically trying to tell them was you will never play like this again if you will have any chance of getting through to the middle round against the Soviets. I think he knew that the Soviets were kind of the end game to all this, because he also shared a connection to the Squaw Valley Olympics. Herb Brooks was an amateur hockey player, and he made the U.S. team in 1960. And just 1 week before the team left for Squaw Valley, he was cut from the team. And they left this line out in the film because I think Gavin OConnor felt that people wouldn't believe it. But when he was watching the team win the game, Herb Brooks, his father turned to him and said, well, it looks like Coach Riley cut the right man, didn't he? So that left a lot of, I think, unfinished business with Herb Brooks. And certainly it became an obsession of his for this particular Olympics was to beat the Russians. It didn't matter to him that they were at home, but that the Russians, that's one of the things I love about the film in general is the portrayal of Herb Brooks, who's more or less portrayed as the main character by Kurt Russell, who is a great actor, as most people know. He's very, very popular for a lot of films he did in the 80s, like Escape from New York and the like. But in this case, I definitely think that this is probably his best acting that I've seen in a long time. And I think he certainly deserved an Oscar nomination for playing a very complicated coach. Most coaches in films can be tough, but fair. Herb Brooks often is not fair. He can be downright cruel to his players. He could say very nasty things, which I was surprised they let slip in a Disney picture, but their goal was authenticity, and certainly his dedication to the part was something to be admired.
Oh, absolutely. I think this is definitely the film that stands out when I think of Kurt Russell. This is the film I think of his performance in. And I also think Guardians of the Galaxy Part 2, but like
True.
this is one of his best performances he's given in his career by far so far. And what's also interesting about the rest of the actors, when you look at the players for both the men's hockey team and the other hockey teams, funnily enough, they're not very recognizable actors. Do you know why that is, Jim?
No, why is that?
Well, the director, when he was starting to get ready for this film and they were doing the pre-production, he's like, how am I going to get, over 100 male men and actors to learn how to skate and play hockey? Again, the average person struggles just to freaking go around an ice rink once or twice, let alone play with enough physicality to trick the camera into thinking, oh, we're playing an actual hockey match. So what he did instead of going and finding actors and teaching them how to play hockey, he took hockey players, like kind of amateurs, college players, things like that, and he taught them how to act, which, kind of going back. Yeah. Kind of going back to the old Hollywood adage of the golden age of like, oh, just find people who, have a passion and everything and just let them go act. It's very almost Audrey Hepburn, in my opinion, because Audrey Hepburn is one of those classic, most famous actresses that she really did. She never took an acting class. She just, got picked up in LA one day, was burst off to Hollywood. Is like, you want to go act? She's like, sure. She ended up winning Academy Awards for it. So I do kind of love that. It's like a fun little tidbit in there. And they do a pretty good job, honestly. None of them stand out for the most part as anything better than what Kurt Russell or the other actors would do in this film. But they all give convincing enough performances. And I think they do a good job of not overselling themselves. They kind of just give that good sort of hockey player persona of like, yeah, like we're softies off the ice, but we have a rough side, and you want to go pick a fight, let's go step outside and let's go pick a fight. Like they will get into it.
They definitely captured that with Michael Mandanuto, who played Jacko Callahan. They had told Mandanuto, they said Jacko Callahan was usually the first one to take off his gloves. Mm-hmm. So, and as shown in the movie, he's very hot tempered, and a lot of things. What's really great, what you just hit on something right there, which is the players don't particularly, they're not super flashy. They don't stand out, but I think that's also maybe a choice on the part of Gavin OConnor, similar to Brooks's strategy. Was Brooks was emphasizing team instead of individuals, which ties into a line at the end of the film when in voiceover, he said a couple of years later, the Olympics started drafting professional athletes for the games, dream teams. I always found that ironic because when you have dream teams, very seldom you get to dream.
Yeah, that's a fantastic line. It's certainly an adage that I personally have felt at times, because as great as it is to see the best athletes go out and compete against each other and to see world records get broken almost every Olympics, it does lose a bit of the passion of, an everyday regular Joe or regular Jane can go on behalf of their country and go win a medal and go represent their country, which is interesting. Also, when you look at the makeup of this team after this Olympics, most of these guys really didn't go on to play hockey after, not professionally. But you would think after a performance like this against a team that, again, beat all of the best of the NHL a few months before this, these guys, for the most part, didn't go. Many of them went to work within hockey organizations as scouts, within the general management office. But pretty much all of them didn't go on to play competitively after this, which I find, again, so very interesting.
In fact, this year you were telling me, you brought to my attention that the NHL isn't allowing any of its players to go to Beijing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a very interesting development. So because of the coronavirus pandemic, what essentially happened is the NHL, in their agreement with the NHL Players Union before the season began, because whenever the Winter Olympics come up, they have to make special considerations because the Olympics always fall right in the middle of the season. So they find a good period where it's like, all right, we're going to take these few weeks off. Players will go compete, then they'll come right back. But with COVID, they were cautious about what would happen if more games had to be delayed, as there were the previous season. They wanted to maintain a full season, unlike the previous year where it was much shortened. The regions, the conferences were much different. And so originally, when they said, yep, this will work, we'll be able to play these games and you can go to the Olympics. But around December, when games started getting postponed, the NHL had to go to the Players Union and say, we can't allow you to go to the Olympics. There's no way that we can get the rest of the season finished on time with player safety in mind while allowing you to go to the Olympics is not possible. So what's interesting about this men's team going to the Olympics in Beijing, and I'm going to read you here some official numbers because I don't want to butcher this, for the U.S. men's team, the makeup, there are 15 current NCAA players, so 15 guys from college who will be representing it, 8 guys who are playing in the European Pro Leagues, and then 2 players from the AHL, which again is the league just below the NHL. So this is very much a team that's competing in the same sort of spirit as the 1980s American on Ice team. They're not a team of professionals for the most part. They're men who are very passionate. Again, a good amount of these 15 players are probably the best college players America has. They'll probably get drafted. So it's not a perfect apples to apples comparison, but it is interesting that they're going back to that tradition a little bit because they have to put a team out there. They've got to go and represent.
Part of me feels like they should, but that it should mostly be amateurs trying to prove themselves. One thing that was also really special about this film in terms of authenticity was they got Al Michaels to recreate his broadcast in most of the games, the Sweden game and the Russian game especially. But there's a special little note that Gavin OConnor wasn't about to force Al Michaels to recreate that famous final countdown and his famous line, because he just felt, I simply can't ask him to do that because that's impossible. So if you have a keen ear, if you watch the film and it's ticking down the final seconds of the Miracle on Ice game, it transitions from a recreation commentary to his actual commentary, and you can tell. But I think that made it more special because part of the fame of that moment was Al Michaels is just over the moon enthusiasm with what he was witnessing and what he was commentating on. And I think that's just a great detail in how committed to authenticity that the script writer Eric Guggenheim, the director Gavin OConnor, the producers, the cast, they were all really striving to make this as realistic and accurate as possible. And I really have to commend them for that, because usually when you have a Disney picture taking a famous story or a famous event, you think, oh, Disney, they like to change things. Well, they don't really change anything. In fact, it's just very much the straight story, which when you read critical reviews of this movie, they call it a very tired cliche film. And I thought, well, this is like the true facts, like little embellishments. So is the argument that the story's been told and inspired for so long that putting it on film is somewhat cliche? But there's a little bit of a interesting dynamic there. But this movie is just simply uplifting. That's one thing that always brings me back to it. I've been watching it since I was a little kid. Even the story itself, this movie and the real story, just lifts your spirits. It makes you feel good to be an American in the way that you're seeing your peers pretty much take on a big bad enemy, like the Soviets. And even in this film, I still get chills down my spine when it hits the final minute and you hear the broadcast and you see the guys in the pen just start banging their sticks, hooting and hollering like we're going to win this game. And the coach Viktor Tikhonov of the Soviet Union is just looking around like a deer in the headlights. He doesn't know how to counter this because it's almost inconceivable.
Mm-hmm. What would you say was your favorite part from the movie, Jim?
Oh, well, there's quite a bit, but one of them is, well, there's two of them really. They're both really great moments of character. Was the first one is right after the match, all the guys run out onto the ice and they're hooting and hollering. The movie answers, it puts on a film and shows people just what exactly Herb Brooks did, because in the broadcast, he doesn't join the team. He leaves. He goes into the tunnel and he disappears. And nobody really knew, like, oh, where'd he go? Like, why didn't he join his team? He went to the locker room tunnel and burst into tears. He just had a little moment for himself. And I just thought that's a pretty special moment, because it was a little bit of his, it was a moment for him too. Like he vicariously achieved his dream of beating the Soviets. The second one was Jim Craig wasn't doing particularly well, the goalie, in one game. And Herb kind of reminded him that he's better than this, in a way that I think a lot of coaches do, which is very brusque, just saying, well, you got to do better, which I know that doesn't sound like good coaching, but sometimes you need to be very blunt with your players. Mm-hmm. Just those two really stood out to me as like, that's really cool. How about yours? How about you?
I think I was between the first one, which isn't my answer, but it's a close second. I think it's the suicide skating the Lions game, because I remember that scene, but I didn't remember the portion before it when the players are essentially all sitting on the bench and they're talking about what they're going to do after the game. And instead of focusing on the game, talking about the pretty girls in the stands. And you could just see Kurt Russell as Herb Brooks just internally boiling. Like you can't have steam blow out of his ears, but you just sense the rage building in him. And I think that scene then of just the explosion on the ice and everything, with making the players skate the lines again and again and again. I think that's a fantastic scene. And again, really hits on that message of that, like you said, this cannot be a team of common men, because they were common men. He's like, you cannot be who people have told you are all through your life at this point.
Yeah.
So I would say that's number two for me. Number one, and I think, Jim, you're going to completely agree with me on this. It's just the pregame speech right before the USSR match.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Which, yeah, I love the entire buildup of it, because it starts with people arriving. The guys are all doing their routines. Like, some guys are fiddling with their sticks, some guys are playing with tape. Then you got Brooks, who's just literally going over his playbook, flipping a page. He knows all the plays by heart, but it's just that maniac of it being a coach of like, I'm going to go through and just do it one last time. Then he goes and gives that amazing speech. And like, that's got to be like a top 10 like movie speech of all time for me, because that's just like, oh
Yeah.
man, it's amazing. It's like so damn good.
Yeah.
And then the part after that, when the players are all walking out, there's great camera work here when all the players grab their sticks and helmets and they're walking out, but you don't see their faces. You just see all the USA on their jerseys coming out towards the camera. They're bumping and hitting the wall with all of their postage stamps from fans around the country who want them to go and win.
Yeah.
And then you hear the stadium, and I just got turned. I just like beneath my breath, I'm going USA, USA,
USA,
USA. It just like it just gets me every time. Like I can watch that movie, I can watch that scene 10 times in a row. I'm still gonna chant every time. So that's definitely got to be number one for me.
Yeah, that's a really great scene, and that's a testament to Gavin OConnor, who's not a particularly famous director. He directed another great sports movie called Warrior with Tom Hardy and Joel Egerton. That was a really great sports film.
Yeah, that's a really good movie.
He shot this movie very matter of factly, which I think was a benefit to the story rather than a detraction, because I think nowadays when you're shooting a sports film, you want to make yourself stand out. And so you think like, oh, well, where can I put my camera? Can I put it low? Can I put it high? Can I put it sticking on the wall? Whereas he has most of the camera out on the ice with the players or from the stands, which I think is more authentic, really, because it takes you out of the stands a little bit, but also gives you a perspective of how the speed of hockey, which has always impressed me. And another thing too was that was sort of the aesthetic back in the early 2000s for sports film, which was very kind of earnest, matter of fact photography. Only a few really stood out in terms of that. Like Seabiscuit was a great example, in The Rookie. Speaking of which, this was in the middle of a really long stretch of Disney producing sports films. Like for a while, if you wanted a quality sports film, you took it to the Walt Disney Studios, which seemed very appropriate for this particular story. What do you think about that?
Well, it's interesting you say that, Jim, because it's also Disney was in a weird period in the early 2000s.
It sure was.
They were trying to adapt with the growing media of at-home video, things like that, and they were branching off from more of their kind of, I think, like traditional movie rights. They were getting away from Snow White, Beauty and the Beast. And they were trying to do different things. I think you saw like other movies that were like that, at least animated ones. You had Treasure Planet, you had Atlantis and Lost Empire, which are both awesome movies, really great. I would love to see a remake, like a live action remake of Atlantis Lost Empire. That would be so awesome. But along with that, also they had movies like Remember the Titans, Rookie, Invincible with Mark Wahlberg. And they had a bunch, like they kind of like didn't know how to market it, really. They were like,
that's true.
We want to appeal to the at-home video audience, but also we want these to be kind of like big theatrical movies. So they kind of went in the middle, and it's like, it's a weird period because people remember these movies very fondly, but they're like, yeah, I don't really remember going to the theaters to see it, or like, I don't remember it being a big movie, but I remember it, and like, you can show me scenes. So it's very interesting. Disney didn't really know, they kind of didn't know how to deal with the early 2000s particularly well, with maybe a few exceptions. It wasn't until the late 2007s when they got movies like they got Cars, they had Ratatouille, like they kind of Didn't their CEO change right around like the mid 2000s as well?
Yeah. So this film came out in 2004, which was kind of the last official year of Michael Eisner's tenure, or in depending on who you ask, his reign of terror at Disney, which deserves a video all its own, frankly. This was right at the end where he was trying to go back to his days in the 80s, both at Paramount and at Disney, which was make films kind of mid-budget, not particularly flashy stars. Like Kurt Russell's never been a superstar, but people like him. So he's a good lead. But in this case, most of the films that came out they made decent money at the box office. They were well received critically. Like this film was received well critically and made a decent amount at the box office.
I think it covered its budget
Yeah.
and made like then doubled it. Like,
yeah,
it covered pretty well.
Yeah. But I think at the time he kind of thought, because he kind of helped oversee the Disney transition in the home video market. So I think he was pretty sure that he made these films to make back more money on home video. And that's certainly where I first saw it. I remember seeing an ad for this in the Chronicle date book. And we all looked and I said, oh, that'd be great to see. Well, it was gone the next day.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't promoted to us locally. And I was like, oh, well, what's the next movie?
Yeah.
But a great story is my grandfather had a copy of it up at his house in Silverado. And during the summers, my brother and my cousins and I, we would sometimes stay over. There was one year for every time we went, every night, we'd wake up, we'd have breakfast, we'd go out and play, we'd go to the pool, and then we'd play some more, have dinner, and then we would watch Miracle every night with a bowl of mint chip ice cream. It was such a fond memory for me. And that just kind of built this love for this story in this movie. So when we decided we were going to do this, I was really, really stoked.
Yeah, I was definitely excited to go back. So again, I don't remember where I saw this movie, but I know I'd seen it before. I've seen it multiple times, in fact. Although I don't think I had a copy of it, but definitely seen it many, many times. And
yeah,
again, it's a medium budget film with the only real exceptional star being Kurt Russell. So like they got their main guy focused on that. They got a kind of medium level director, like all just kind of like right down the middle. They weren't going to spend a lot, but they were going to like make their money back. So it was smart in terms of business decision. But again, like in terms of like film impact, even though this is one of the best sports movies that's ever been made, I think, at least in American cinema.
Agreed. Agreed.
It's a very muted effect because it wasn't really marketed. It wasn't really put out there, except for kind of like, I remember like really shoddy at. Again, that was also the other thing Disney was terrible at in the early 2000s. Their trailers were really shoddy. They were like a bunch of like, flash cuts back and forth. And then they threw the name of the movie up really loudly in front of you. It's like,
that's true.
What the hell did we just watch?
That's true. I just rewatched the trailer. I was like, this isn't a very good trailer.
No, it was terrible. They terrible trailers. Like that was terrible. I remember Invincible trailer with Mark Wahlberg. It's a good movie, mill budget, not as good as this, but it's a fun story. But I'm like, what is this? Like, and that was more of a fun trailer because that came out that was like, I think 06 or 07. And so they had some like better things going for it.
Yeah.
But Jim, let me ask you another question here to kind of transition. So where does this kind of rank for you in terms of sports movies? Because there are a lot of really good sports movies. We've had this debate before. It's really hard, I think, to get a top 5 best sports movies movie list, in my opinion.
I'll state some candidates where I think this movie ranks. I think this movie ranks with Brian's Song, which is a really great movie.
I've never seen that. No.
you got to check that out with James Caan and Billy D. Williams. That's a movie where men can cry, and it's all right, really. Rocky is definitely one, the first Rocky. Remember the Titans, I love.
Remember the Titans. Remember the Titans is up there for me. It's funny you say Rocky because when I think of the very first Rocky, I don't think of that as a sports movie. I think of that as like a drama film, which is
good point.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, like all the sequels, absolutely, even the Creed movies they did later on. but I don't remember that as a sports movie, even though it is. It totally is.
Yeah,
I don't know, it's more akin to Raging Bull than it is to a sports movie for me.
good point. Very good point.
Mhm.
Let's see if more traditional sports movies. I think well, Seabiscuit's more of a drama, I think. Uh,
I gotta be honest. This is gonna be a hot take for you, Jim. After I watched this, I watched Sea Biscuit. Wasn't blown away.
really?
Yeah, we're gonna have to save that for a hot take someday because I honestly thought it was like,
Okay.
maybe it was just overhyped for me, but
Okay.
honestly, I was going through and I'm like, I get it, but like, I don't really think it's that great.
Okay. All right. Hey, that's all right. Well, yeah, we'll
He's gonna
save that.
drive over to my house tonight and strangle me in my sleep
No,
now that I've said
no,
this.
no, 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 no. I do get the criticism against that, but this one really is Miracle really ranks high. In fact, little more fun tidbits. This movie won the ESPY Award for Best Sports Film for 2004, which
Mhm.
I don't know that it's not as prestigious as the Oscars, but if ESPN really loves the film, then that's really great
Yeah,
because
I think
they
that's kind of
they take issue with a lot of sports films. So for that to happen was kind of cool.
yeah, I think that's more of a testament to like really detailing like all the historical events that were going on, like summarizing the feelings of America. I feel like it's more of a reward for that than like, oh, you made a great movie. It's like, no, you made a really relevant movie that captures what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's up there. For me, like other sports movies, again, we keep going to boxing movies, even though like again, real shortly, and again, I don't consider this a sport. Like The Fighter with Mark Wahlberg, Christian Bale, love the movie to death. I don't really consider it a sports movie. It's more of a
No.
drama, which I think like a lot of like boxing movies kind of struggle. But when I do
Yeah.
consider a sports movie that I absolutely love, Cinderella Man with Russell Crowe. That came out
Yeah.
right around this one, like a year or two before it. That's one of my top five. That is a
Oh,
fantastic,
that's a good one.
movie. Hell of a damn performance. I think Paul Giamatti should have gotten Best Supporting Actor. That man freaking deserved it. So that's definitely up there for me.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of other sports movies, though, I'm struggling now that I bring this up to think of ones off the cuff because I'm starting to struggle now.
Oh.
Oh, another one that's really good that I personally, not to cut you off, Moneyball.
Yes.
I absolutely love Moneyball. Not just because
Yes.
the fact I'm from Oakland. I'm a Giants fan at heart. I love the A's. I'm a Giants fan at heart. But
Yeah.
and I'm actually reading the book right now, which is a great, easy read. I started it this weekend. I'm already halfway through it.
There you go.
But like that's a movie where it really captures like not only why do we compete, but like how do we compete? Like how do you build a sports team? It's very
Yeah.
much a business movie as it is a sports movie, and I absolutely love that one.
Yeah. There is one more that I forgot to mention. I don't know if you feel like this is more of a drama than a sports film. I think it's a perfect mixture of both. Friday Night Lights.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, total sports movie. Absolutely. God, I see.
Yeah.
See, now that we start listing all of these off, you're like, damn, like there's a lot of great sports movies out there. Like, and
Yeah.
see, this is where because I could easily see a ton of those being in my top five. And I think that's the struggle is that when you do a sports movie really well, it really captures people's hearts, which is the point of a sports movie. It's supposed to move you. It's supposed to fill you with joy and passion.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I would really struggle to make it like actually list out a top five because I'm sure there are others that are out there that I've forgotten about. I would start
Yeah.
to put them in order. I'm like, wait, no, I gotta have that one in there. Oh, but then I take that one out. I would completely just implode on myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And this movie really does lift the spirits and lift the heart up for sure. And I think one of the reasons why I think we picked this one now is because America right now is going through a bit of a as as President Carter once put it, I think America itself is going through a crisis of confidence because there's eerily similar circumstances to when you look at 2022 America to 1979, 1980 America, which yeah, where we need stories like this. We need moments like, which is why I'm looking forward to the Olympics, is seeing, looking for those athletes who really outshine and kind of for somebody like me to get behind, you know?
No, I completely agree, Jim. And when that line got said in the movie, with Jimmy Carter's speech, oh, it gave me chills. It
Yeah.
really did, because I think when you look back over the last 6 years of America history, and again, not we don't usually get very political on
No.
this podcast, but I think it's important that we talk about, because again, like that's why these movies are so great, because they connect to our history, and they connect to what's going on. They give us lessons to learn from. Um, I think there's like just the events itself. You have energy is a big issue right now. You have inflation, which is a massive discussion topic right now.
Yeah.
There is a huge issue in the Middle East pulling it when Biden pulled out of Afghanistan. It rubbed a lot of people very, very wrong. I felt like it was done very poorly. And there's also the huge issue of all the protests and civil rights movement going on right now. Generally, we're probably looking at one of the points in American history where there's not a lot of like faith and not a lot of confidence in politics or in politicians. I think you go back, like a perfect way to describe that, you go back to the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. They were the two least like presidential candidates for years, decades. And I think really going back to this presidency, it really, or the 2020 election, you felt like, oh, if you don't like Trump, you go Biden, even though if you may not like Biden, you got to do it because you don't like Trump. And like if I don't like Biden, I'm forced to vote for Trump again. So it's really interesting that there are a lot of similarities. And I think there's a lot of questions being asked right now if Biden is going to be a Jimmy Carter of his generation, be a one-term president.
There's certainly a lot of circumstances that are matching up with Jimmy Carter, who I kind of feel like was a good president, just not at that time.
He's extremely smart man. Very smart. Went to the U.S. Naval Academy.
Yeah.
Was a really like smart, hardworking guy. I think, again, he, like you were about to say, was like a victim of the times and the circumstances he had going on.
Yeah. And the late 70s, even though it is a chilling speech that I respect Carter for making, at the time, it was not what most Americans wanted to hear, I think, because we were already kind of stuck in that mire. But, so I think the Miracle on Ice really took off because people, as you said earlier, were just so starved for something good about America, something that Americans can do. And we beat the number one hockey team in the world, and it was the Soviets, our biggest enemy for years. And again, coming back to the film, that it just captures that mood, which was our spirits are really down. And once these boys really rose to the challenge, people were, Al Michaels even described, he says, when the U.S. got the go-ahead goal, when Michael Ruzioni scored the final goal of the game and put the U.S. up 4-3. He says sound had feeling and that his booth was rattling. That's how loud people were in the stadium. And even outside, people who couldn't get in the stadium were outside listening on their radios or on little portable televisions. And they were making a lot of noise pollution in the street. They said that Lake Placid could probably be heard from Manhattan.
Just funny because Lake Placid is like middle of nowhere.
Exactly.
There's a reason they haven't gone back to it. It's middle of nowhere.
Exactly. And it was just
where is Lake Placid? Is it Michigan?
The Adirondacks in New York.
That's right. Thank you.
So
I knew it was like somewhere in like the northern part region. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and always for me, a sports film comes down to, is it rewatchable, and does it still give me that sense of, excitement when the final match happens or when the final thing is about to occur? This movie is endlessly rewatchable, and it still gives me that feeling of, oh boy, they're going to win. It's just like, oh boy, we won, just like I was at, sitting on my grandfather's couch in Napa watching with my bowl of ice cream. It was just like, even though we watched it every night that week, like clockwork, it still pulls you in. It still envelops that feeling around your heart. And it's just like, yes. And as you pointed out in our pregame, the perfect song to go over the end credits was
Dream On by Aerosmith. Like, F and A, Cotton. F and A.
F and A, Cotton.
It's like,
Yeah.
you gotta be kidding me. Like, I heard that. I was like, let's go. I turned the TV all the way up. I'm like, I don't care if the neighbors are pissed. This is awesome.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree, Jim. Like you said, for me, the sign of a great sportsman, like you said, one has to be rewatchable. Because it'd be like going back to a championship game that like you recorded on the TiVo or have on a DVD somewhere, rewatching that. There are games, there are professional sports games I would rewatch 100 times over easily. And so definitely has to be rewatchable. And I think it's gotta, like I said, it's gotta capture the spirit of the moment or what it's trying to talk about. And I think that's the key of a really, really great sports movie. This captures the spirit of America at one of its lowest points in recent history. I think you look at other sports movies like Friday Night Lights. Friday Night Lights captures the love and also the complexity and sadness of high school sports, especially high school football. You look at Remember the Titans. Remember the Titans captures like dealing with racism in a very real environment and also the inspiration and power that sports gives the world. It just to name a few, I could keep going on, but again, it has to capture the spirit, because if you don't have spirit in sports, it's not entertaining. It's not worth watching at the end of the day.
Nope.
I do have one last little question for you, Jim. This is a fun one, I think, to end on. Just on a personal note, what do you prefer more, the Winter Olympics or the Summer Olympics?
Oh, good question.
This is a hotbed topic. I had heard this previously for the last Summer Olympics in Japan, which we really only saw just this last summer. So it's weird seeing the Summer Olympics and Winter Olympics back to back, because that never happens.
We're witness to something very special.
Yeah, seriously.
My thing is there's events in both that really grab my attention. Like, I love Summer Olympics for the swimming. I love Winter Olympics. I love for the hockey, and I especially love for the bobsleds. I don't know why, but I just think the bobsleds. I know why. I know why. The bobsleds are just so awesome. And in fact, if there's another great Disney sports movie you want to watch, maybe not great, but very good, very enjoyable, is Cool Runnings. Which
fun thing you say that. Sorry, Jim, go ahead. Say it.
No. That's a fun one, because I love the bobsleds. I love the training that goes into it, and just how that one kind of feels like you're really skating on the edge. You're pushing the envelope. Same as the luge.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that, because also with this Winter Olympics coming up, for the first time since that, the Jamaican team is sending a national bobsled team to Beijing. I'm like, that's right. Let's go. We got the boys back together.
Yeah. I'm so excited to see that. I want to see if that pans out. I think honestly, the one I kind of enjoy watching the most is the Winter Olympics, because even though I love the Summer Olympics, I feel like the Winter Olympics just has a little bit more of a challenge, because the summer you have to, especially in Japan last year, they had to tolerate the heat, which was unbearable from what I understand. In this one, you have snow, and you have the decathlon, you have all this stuff. You're in adverse conditions. You really have to test your mettle. Yeah. So that's where I stand. Where do you stand on that?
Oh man, it's tough. I feel like the answer is winter. I think one, just because when it comes to the summer events that I look forward to more, I don't look as much forward to basketball, because I feel like the quality's not as good as the NBA, in my opinion. So that doesn't excite me. The swimming is fun. Swimming is really great. There's so many damn events though. Same with track and field. It's like, they're fun to watch, but like if you watch the Olympics continuously, by the time you get to the 10th meet you're seeing, you're like, how much longer is this going to last? It's really draining. Which I'm sure there are definitely Winter Olympics comparisons, but it just feels like so much more in the Summer Olympics. Let's see, what else? I will say my favorite one to watch is definitely hockey, because when you get hockey on the international scale, it's super competitive. It's as competitive as the NHL. A lot of those guys go and compete there in the NHL, but it's just as competitive. So I love that. I love the skiing. And also Michaela Schifrin, You're my heart and soul. Go win gold, baby. I freaking love you. So I absolutely love downhill skiing. I love the luge. So awesome. This is a hot take. My brother also loved this. I love curling. if people think it's the most boring sport, but you watch it, you're like, no, this is so damn entertaining. If you just watch what's going on, it's so damn great.
My perspective is I don't understand curling. So it's just like, I watch it very curiously. I'm just like, okay, I think I'm starting to get it. And then it's just like, oh no, they can't do that. It's like, why? But you know,
it's a little
also this year Winter Olympics has a big pull for me because it'll be Shaun White's final Olympic appearance, I think.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. That's a big one.
And you and I think have grown up with Shaun White. My mom even said the other night, she says, I remember when he first started. So that's quite a long ways, but he's still a badass competitor, I must say.
Oh, hell yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I also am kind of looking forward to ice skating a little bit. Again, it's one of those things where I'm like, I feel like the people who score it versus the people who watch it are like two different sets of people.
Yeah.
I am looking forward to it a little bit. Again, Mariah Bell.
One more good sports movie is I, Tonya. You know, you just reminded me.
That's an interesting
movie. You know, since we're on the topic of Olympics and film again. So
yeah.
But yeah, so the Olympics are going to be the Winter Olympics, I should say, are going to be really interesting this year. Love to see how they deal with it in Beijing. And I really am looking forward to backing those amateurs, just like we were back for the Miracle on Ice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be fun to see him go out and compete for sure. And I think signing off here again, I'm Parker Glazner.
I'm Jim Crowley.
And we'll see you next time on Jim Parker's Excellent Podcast. And let's go, Team USA!
USA!